like to introduce a fabulous speaker. He started as a botanist and then now he's a company advisor. He works around doing speaking internationally. He's next level fabulous. I need to do more Zumba. Okay. Now, he's going to be talking to us about renewable energies and the ways that it impacts us in the world. Will you please give him a big, giant round of applause? It's Ray Wills. Give him a round of applause.
Okay, good day everyone. I'm going to come down close to you. No, I'm still going to come down close to you. Now, I always like to start speaking about language. Who can say hello in French? Anyone? Can you say hello in French?
Bonjour.
No? Bonjour. Who can say hello in Japanese? Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. How about ni hao in Chinese? Hello.
Hello.
Who can say hello in Maori, New Zealand? What do we say? Kia ora. Kia ora. What about in Noongar? Who can say anything in Noongar?
Kaya.
Kaya kora. Well done. So when we actually say hello in Noongar language, the local southwest language, it's kei korda, which is very much like kia ora if you think about it. So it's not too hard for us to say kei korda in Noongar if we want to. I think it's important in thinking about our future as we think about renewables, about what our past is like, what our past heritage is, and embracing it. Lots of other places have done so. I want to talk to you today about health, wealth and happiness, and what that means for the world and what that means in terms of a renewable world and a sustainable world. What we're seeing in the world today is a remarkable change in energy. The world every year invests about $1.5 trillion to develop energy infrastructure. So that's $1,500 billion. Now, what do we spend that on? We spend it on looking for oil and gas, we spend it on looking for coal, we spend it on building the Browse Basin, we spend it on building gas plants and coal plants, and we also spend it on building solar and renewable wind farms and so forth. Now, over the course of the next year and a half, the fossil fuel industry says that their investment in energy is going to decline. They actually think there will be a 40% decline in the investment in fossil fuel. The really interesting thing is at the same time, there will be no decline in the investment in renewables. Each year, out of that $1.5 trillion, we spend about $320 billion on renewables. And we've done that for the last 4 or 5 years. And as fossil fuel investment is being reduced, renewable energy investment is either being maintained or growing. And if you do the numerator over the denominator, what that means is that renewable energy investment is growing quite dramatically. In the course of the next few years, we're going to see even more renewable energy investment than we've seen in the last few. Who knows when the iPhone was invented? When did we first get the iPhone? 2007, 8 years ago. Who knows when wind farms first started getting really big? Was it 5 years ago, 10 years ago? 10? It's not even 10 years ago, because wind farms started getting big about the same time we got the iPhone. The revolution of wind is only 7 or 8 years old. Okay, we seem to have had solar forever. Seems to have been around forever. How old do you reckon the solar revolution is? 8 years? The answer is only 4. The significant growth of solar energy on this planet only started 4 years ago. In Australia, where we live, there's 8 million homes. And only 4 or 5 years ago, only 100,000 homes in Australia had solar. Today, it's 1.4 million. The change in 4 years is incredible. There's been more change in 4 years in renewables than there has been change in 7 years in an iPhone. So the revolution is actually quite remarkable. And what this actually extends to is a whole range of things. So let's go to those catchphrases of health, wealth and happiness. Health. One of the things that renewables don't do is produce air pollution. So if we actually replace coal-fired power stations and gas-fired power stations with solar and with wind, we actually get less air pollution as a consequence. Yes, there's a manufacturing process. Skeptics will say that, or what about where you build them? Yes, there is a manufacturing process. And that needs to be clean, that needs to be sustainable. But once we get to the point of producing energy, there's no air pollution associated with it. And around Australia, there's an estimated $4 to $5 billion of cost of air pollution every year. Globally, that number is in the range of about $200 billion a year as a consequence of the cost of air pollution. So if we can clean up our air by getting energy from renewable sources, this actually represents a saving to the budget, and of course it also represents a saving to health, to our own health, because it impacts on us. As we actually think about how this changes the way the world works, it really is quite remarkable. Health is simply one aspect of this better source of renewables, of this better source of energy. We go on to wealth, and wealth is actually a really important thing, because we had a wonderful singer up earlier. He's busy generating local wealth and doing local music. But actually this century is interestingly going to be much more about local wealth. And we're actually seeing it through the fair here today, where people are coming up with new ways of creating enterprise that, yes, creates business, but creates business in a sustainable way. And it really is a remarkable change. So where can we see evidence of this happening? How can we see evidence of this happening with what we do with solar? Well, part of the answer is that when you actually buy energy in the old way, where you actually have electricity connected to your house through a power line, you actually effectively get electricity through the power line to you, and you in effect send money down that power line to the person that produced it. And they're usually a long, long way away. If you live in the bush in Western Australia, then invariably that money flows to the city, which is where the power company resides, whether it be Western Power or Synergy, or whether it be one of the other energy providers. If you put solar panels on the roof, you're paying yourself. You keep the money in your pocket because you've now got that cash flow into your own pocket. Now, what do you do when you get that cash? You save it and you stick it in the bank? Or do you go out and buy a cup of coffee? And the answer is, for 60% of that revenue that we actually save, we end up spending it. And when we spend it, we don't send it down a wire to a centrally planned energy system. We actually spend it locally. We come to a fair like this, we buy a cup of coffee, we buy a CD, we buy something else like that, but we actually get to spend the money on what we want to. The consequence of that is that local economies are strengthened as a consequence of the deployment of renewables on our rooftops. If you're in a regional town like Broome or Kununurra or Halls Creek or Esperance, and you actually start spending more money locally rather than sending that money off to the city, to the big power company, then more of your community flourishes as a consequence. It's a transfer of wealth, but it's a transfer of wealth back to the community. It really is a remarkable outcome, and we're seeing more and more of that come along as we deploy more renewables. The other thing that transference of wealth does is it actually creates jobs locally, so your communities get stronger as a consequence that there's more baristas or there's more musicians singing on the street corner, because there's more money in the community to actually bolster and bring jobs on in that way. The other part of that wealth creation is an interesting one, and that's the insurance industry. The insurance industry actually insures health, it insures car accidents, it insures homes. All of these things are actually changed as a consequence of renewable energy as we put it into the community. One simple example is something new that's coming through. You've all probably heard about Volkswagen and their terrible fraud that's actually meant that what that fraud means is that there's more pollution in the air. As we move to electric vehicles, as we move to a community, to a roadscape like this, and as the bus goes past, instead of it being noisy and sticking out diesel fumes, it'll be quiet, it'll be electric vehicle, and it won't be polluting the atmosphere. As we sit in this place, it will be quieter and cleaner. But there's an additional thing that goes along with that. As we grow technology, we're moving now, you've also probably heard about self-driving vehicles. One of the things about self-driving vehicles is that they're actually really pre-adapted to electric vehicles, and as we see over the next 5 and 10 years some evolution in that space, we'll actually see a change in the insurance structure as a consequence of this move to clean tech. Why is that? Because when we drive a car, there's the 95% of accidents that are caused on Australian roads are caused by we, the driver. That means our insurance premiums are $1,000 or $1,500 a year. That means that every year there are 1,600 people killed on roads in Australia. That means that every year we spend $20 billion a year on the costs associated with road accidents. when we actually move to self-driving vehicles, we'll have fewer accidents. We'll have fewer ambulances. We'll have fewer trauma wards. We'll actually have fewer surgeons. And the National Health Bill will actually be lower as a consequence. And at the same time, the other thing that changes is the insurance bill will come down because there'll be fewer accidents, and insurance premiums will be reduced if you're in a self-driving car. So instead of paying $1,500 a year, you might be paying $200 a year for your insurance policy. So actual personal costs come down. This is another reflection of this change in the green economy, the blue economy, as we grow towards change. So one of the other things that I wanted to mention there is that what that reflects on for Australia as we move to electric vehicles. You know that the Australian car industry is closing down, and that can for some people be a bad thing because we're losing jobs and we're losing manufacturing capacity. But what it also means is that it means all future cars that come into Australia can actually have a newer, higher energy efficiency standard. Now, the fuel that we currently use in most motor vehicles is actually now all imported, because at the same time we were closing the car industry, we've actually closed the oil industry in Australia. Refineries are mostly shut down. BP's the last one to go. And then after that, all of the fuel, the petrol, the diesel that we use in Australia will be imported. And Australia actually imports $20 billion worth of fuel every year. Well, imagine if our car fleet was more efficient. Imagine if it was electric, that's number two. But number one, even if most of the petrol and diesel cars on the road today were more efficient, we would actually import less oil. And as a consequence of that, Australia's deficit would be lower, which means the national economy would be stronger. So we actually see efficiency gains as a consequence of moving to greener vehicles. The next obvious step, moving from petrol-fuelled cars and diesel-fuelled cars onto electric cars, is that means that all of the energy that drives that car is made in Australia. We could potentially eliminate almost $20 billion worth of imports through the through the reduction of energy use in motor cars through energy efficiency, and then in the conversion to electric vehicles, we'll actually save up to $20 billion a year of imports into Australia. Now, Australia's annual deficit is in the order of about $8 to $10 billion a year. So by eliminating fossil fuel imports, we can actually eliminate Australia's deficit, and our economy is stronger. So really interesting implications there. So that's the world side dealt with. Happiness is another one that I really wanted to come back onto. And how happiness is the final part of my plank of why we should do this stuff. It's interesting to note, I'm going to read this one out, that Australia is a natural for clean tech, because we know from polls that most Australians support renewables. So that's not a bad outcome. We also know that, in a sense, if we supply our own energy, it's effectively an integral part of the democratic process. We're making decisions for ourselves. We make those decisions every day with new apps on the iPhone. We make those decisions every day with how we get on a bus or how we take transport. We can actually start to make those decisions as well with energy if we choose to use renewable energy on our homes, and if we encourage our government to use renewable energy right through our enterprises and right through our economy. So ultimately there's been a whole range of obvious democratic processes that have been a part of the clean tech debate over the last few years. The divest from coal campaign, the divest from fossil fuels campaign is another example of that. And so we're actually seeing a range of changes in our community as social media, as communities get stronger through social media, as events like this get bolstered as a consequence of social media. They also give us a voice back to government. How do we know that social media is an important part of this change? Well, because of the world's most famous selfie of 2015. And that was the selfie between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Li Qiang from China. Now, when the leaders of the world's two most populous countries in the world pause to take a selfie and post it on the internet, you know that the world has changed. The power of social media is reflected in the power of that political expression, and the opportunities that we, the people, have to actually deliver messages through social media continues to grow. And so the consequence of that is that our power base grows. What does that mean? That means a better democracy. that means that democracy works better. And actually some of this is being empowered through social campaigns for a greener planet that actually create change within the community. It makes our lives better, it reduces pollution, and it reduces our reliance on fossil fuels that ultimately contribute to climate change. So, in closing, I'd love to finish with and take a few questions if anybody's got them. But I wanted to read a quote from Henry Ford, and it's a business quote. And Henry Ford, who made the Model T Ford, Henry Ford said, "A good business makes excellent products and earns a healthy return. A great business does all of that while making people's lives better." And really what sustainability brings is improvements to business that actually at the same time as doing good business actually improves people's lives and improves the planet at the same time. So I'd like to end there and take any questions if anybody's got them. But thanks for listening, and I hope I've given you some ideas for the future. Thank you.